You're driving home, maybe after dinner, maybe after a long, draining day, when suddenly your rearview mirror explodes in red and blue. Surprised, your stomach tightens. You instinctively check your speed. You mentally rewind the last mile. Was that turn too fast? Did you miss a signal? You pull over, your hands a little too tense on the wheel, telling yourself to stay calm. The officer walks up, composed, direct. You roll down the window, exchange the basics. And then comes the question that changes the entire tone of the encounter. Any weapons in the vehicle? It sounds simple, casual even. But it's not small talk. It's a pivot point. Because if you answer the way most people do, honestly, openly, trying to be helpful, you may have just handed over the legal and psychological leverage that turns a routine stop into something much bigger. The moment a firearm enters the conversation, everything can shift. You might be asked to step out of the car, you might be separated from your vehicle, your firearm might be secured somewhere else. Suddenly, what felt like a minor traffic issue starts to feel like an investigation. Here's what most people don't realize. The danger isn't in being a lawful gun owner. The danger is in saying the wrong thing, at the wrong time, in the wrong state, without understanding how that one answer can expand the officer's options. There is a single, calm, clear sentence that can protect your rights without making you look suspicious or hostile. But whether you say it, and when you say it, depends entirely on where you are and what your legal obligations are there. By the end of this video, you'll know how to handle that moment so you don't accidentally talk yourself into a search, an extended detention, or something worse. Hi, I'm Artur, and on Borderless Pathways I break down real-world legal encounters so you know how to protect yourself calmly, confidently, and intelligently. This isn't about being anti-police, and it's not about being reckless with your rights. It's about understanding how roadside encounters actually work, psychologically and legally, so you don't make a permanent mistake in a temporary situation. If you're a lawful gun owner, or even if you're not, but you want to understand your rights during a traffic stop, what we're about to cover could save you from unnecessary escalation. We're going to look at when you must disclose a firearm, when you don't, why that any weapons question matters so much, and the exact words you can use to protect yourself without creating extra tension. Because the side of the road is not where you win arguments, it's where you avoid extra charges. And once you understand what's really built into that one question, you'll never hear it the same way again. Before we talk about guns, we need to fix something that causes more problems than almost anything else in traffic stops: not understanding what you actually owe the officer. When you're lawfully pulled over, you are generally required to provide 3 things if asked: your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. That's not optional. That's not an invitation to a constitutional debate. That's the price of driving on public roads. This is where some people blow up a simple stop by trying to argue roadside constitutional theory. You've probably heard lines like, "I'm not engaged in commerce," or "I'm traveling, not driving," or "I don't need a license because I have a right to travel." Let's clear that up. The constitutional right to travel is about your ability to move freely between states and be treated equally under the law. It is not a magic phrase that lets you operate a motor vehicle without a license or registration. Trying to run that argument on the shoulder of the highway does not make you look informed. It makes you look obstructive. That's how a basic speeding stop turns into refusal to identify, obstruction, or worse. The roadside is not a courtroom. It's not a lecture hall. It is a controlled environment where the officer has legal authority over the stop. Your job there is simple: comply physically, protect yourself verbally. That means hand over the documents you're required to provide. Keep your movements slow and easy to see. If it's dark, turn on your interior light. Keep your hands on the wheel. If your registration is in the glove box, say clearly, "My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed?" And wait for an answer before you move. Narrating your movements does 2 things. It keeps the encounter calm, and it makes it very hard for anyone later to honestly claim you were reaching or making suspicious movements. Calm, visible, predictable. That's the baseline you want. Because once those basics are out of the way, that's when the stop either stays routine or starts to turn into something else. And that turn often begins with one line. Any weapons in the vehicle? Here's where most people have no idea the correct answer depends heavily on geography. In the United States, firearm disclosure laws generally fall into three broad categories. If you carry, you should know which category your state falls into before you ever see blue lights behind you. First, duty to inform states. In these states, if you are carrying a firearm, especially under a permit, you are legally required to tell the officer during a lawful stop. That disclosure is built into the conditions of carrying there. Second, inform if asked states. In these places, you may not have to volunteer the information the moment you're pulled over, but if the officer directly asks whether you have a weapon, you may be legally obligated to answer truthfully. Third, no duty to disclose states. In these jurisdictions, unless some separate law or specific circumstance applies, you are not required to tell the officer that you're carrying. Now here's the key point that most people miss. Even in a state where you have no legal duty to disclose, the moment the officer becomes aware that a firearm is present, the nature of the stop usually changes. Not because you've done something illegal, but because of human psychology and police training. From the officer's perspective, they are standing inches away from an unknown person who has access, real or potential, to a lethal weapon. You might be perfectly polite and fully lawful. It doesn't matter. The risk calculation in their mind has just changed. Unknown person plus firearm equals elevated caution. That elevated caution triggers training. Training triggers procedure. And procedure is all about control. Control might look like you being asked to step out of the car. It might mean being told to keep your hands higher or more visible. It might mean the officer saying they're going to temporarily secure your firearm for safety. None of that automatically means you're in trouble, but it absolutely means the stop has escalated beyond a basic license and registration encounter. Legally, this matters because when officer safety is invoked, the legal toolbox gets bigger. During a lawful traffic stop, officers already have authority to order a driver out of the vehicle. If they reasonably believe someone may be armed and dangerous, they can conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. They may also do a brief protective sweep of areas within immediate reach if they can articulate a safety concern. That word, articulate, is critical. Later, in reports or in court, everything is justified through articulation. The driver appeared very nervous. The driver was unusually calm. It was a high-crime area. The driver avoided eye contact. The driver kept looking toward the center console. Some of those details even contradict each other. But in legal analysis, a string of small, innocent behaviors can be stacked together under training and experience to justify further investigation. That's why your words matter so much. Every extra detail you volunteer can become one more brick in a narrative you never intended to help build. And this is where most vehicle searches really begin, not with dramatic probable cause, but with conversation. There are two main ways a routine stop turns into a vehicle search. The first is consent. The second is building enough reasonable suspicion to extend the stop. Consent is by far the most common. It does not require probable cause. It only requires you to agree, clearly or indirectly. Officers are trained in how to ask. You might hear, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" Or, "If you've got nothing to hide, this shouldn't be a problem." That kind of framing is intentional. It shifts the burden onto you, making refusal feel like an admission of guilt. Most people want to look cooperative. They want to show they're the good guy. They don't want to seem difficult. So they talk, they explain, they reassure, and in doing that, they often give either explicit consent or enough verbal room for the officer to treat it as consent. The uncomfortable truth is this: you almost never talk your way out of a search. You talk your way into one. The more you explain, the more angles there are for follow-up questions. More questions mean more chances for small inconsistencies. Once there are inconsistencies, real or perceived, reasonable suspicion, is easier to claim. If this is already changing how you think about traffic stops, that's the point. Most people only learn this after a bad experience. So let's talk about the exact phrases that shut these doors without turning the encounter into a fight. The goal is not to be combative. The goal is to be calm, brief, and legally precise. Once you've handed over your license, registration, and insurance, and you've done whatever the law in your state requires about disclosing a firearm, the stop often slides into conversation. It may sound casual, it may even sound friendly, but many of the next questions are not about curiosity. They're about building a record. Where are you coming from tonight? Harmless on the surface. It's not really about geography. It's about locking in your story. If your answer shifts later, that's a note. If your passenger says something a little different, that's a note. If you hesitate, that's a note. Your safest answer is simple, said calmly and respectfully. I plead the fifth. Same tone you'd use to say your name. No sarcasm, no attitude, just steady. People worry that invoking the Fifth Amendment makes them look guilty. In reality, it is a constitutional right. And the kind of officer who gets angry at you for calmly invoking a constitutional right is exactly the kind of officer you need that right around. You are not refusing to identify yourself. You're not refusing to hand over documents. You are simply choosing not to answer investigative questions. Next comes a sharper one. Is there anything illegal in the car? This question is dangerous because it pushes you toward absolute certainty in a situation where you don't control every variable. You think you know what's in your car, but you can't account for everything that's ever been in it. A friend's bag, something left under a seat, trash someone tossed in, something that fell between cushions months ago. If you say, no, there's absolutely nothing illegal in here, and they later find something, even minor, you now look like you lied. Your response should be the same. I plead the fifth. Same calm tone, same short delivery. Your power comes from consistency. You are not arguing. You are not being dramatic. You are simply declining to provide statements that can be used against you later. Now, the most manipulative phrasing. You wouldn't mind if I take a look, right? That question is structured so that either yes or no can be spun into consent. No, I don't mind sounds like, go ahead. Yes sounds like agreement. So you refuse to play on those terms. You answer with clarity, I do not consent to any searches. That sentence is clear. It's unambiguous. It sounds the same on body cam as it does in your head. You're not accusing the officer of anything. You're not disrespecting them. You're just drawing a legal boundary. If they press, why not? Or, if you've got nothing to hide, you don't get pulled into an argument. You calmly repeat, I do not consent to any searches. Broken record. Same words, same tone. Another favorite escalation tool is the K9 threat. I'll just call a dog. What you need to know is this. An officer generally cannot lawfully prolong a completed traffic stop just to wait for a dog unless they have separate reasonable suspicion. How do they often build that suspicion? Through your nervousness, your changing explanations, your emotional reactions. Mentioning a dog is often psychological pressure. People panic and say, fine, just search it, thinking they're speeding things up. In reality, they're giving up a right for free. Your response still does not change. I do not consent to any searches. You do not argue about K9 case law on the shoulder of the road. You don't debate stop duration. You quietly preserve your position and let any legal challenge happen later, in the right place, with a lawyer. There's also what I call attitude bait, a raised voice, sarcasm, a dismissive tone. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it isn't. But the effect can be the same, pushing you into anger. Angry people talk more. They move more. They say reckless things like, I don't care, do whatever you want. Those sentences read very badly in reports. Your advantage is emotional contrast. If they get louder, you get quieter. If they speed up, you slow down. Calm tends to look credible on video. Chaos almost never does. Your core toolkit is simple. I plead the fifth. I do not consent to any searches. Now let's turn that into a simple roadside handbook in your head, especially if you carry, but even if you don't. First, before you ever drive armed, know your state's category. Duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. That determines your first move when you hear, "Any weapons in the vehicle?" Second, when the officer approaches, keep your hands visible, preferably on the steering wheel. At night, turn on your interior light. Third, narrate your movements before you reach anywhere. My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed? Fourth, if your state legally requires you to disclose a firearm, do it calmly and clearly, then stop talking. Don't start discussing where you train, how often you carry, or your opinions about gun laws. Fifth, if you're asked for consent to search, say, "I do not consent to any searches." Sixth, for investigative questions beyond basic identification and the reason for the stop, say, "I plead the fifth." Finally, if the stop feels like it's dragging on beyond the original purpose, you can ask two simple questions. Am I being detained? And am I free to go? If you're free to go, leave calmly. If you are being detained, stay calm, stop volunteering information, and keep asserting your rights verbally, not physically. If you know someone who carries, or someone who assumes being polite is all they need to stay safe, share this with them. Most people don't learn these distinctions until after a mistake they didn't need to make. Now we need to talk about the most serious moment in this whole interaction, the moment when a firearm is physically involved. Up to now, we've focused on protecting your legal position. What comes next is about protecting your life. If you're carrying and the officer decides they want to secure your firearm for safety, your ego, your pride, and your politics have to sit this one out. This is not about proving a point. This is about staying alive. Never handle a firearm in the presence of an officer during a stop. Ever. Not because you're trying to be helpful. Not because they casually say, "Just hand it to me." Not because you're sure you can do it safely. From their perspective, the second your hand moves toward a weapon, everything becomes a split-second threat calculation. Adrenaline is high. Reaction times are tight. Misread signals happen in fractions of a second. And when a gun is in motion, the law almost always leans toward the officer under the umbrella of officer safety, if anything goes wrong. If something happens in that instant, you do not get the benefit of the doubt. So here's how to handle it correctly. If your state requires you to disclose and you've told the officer you're carrying, and they ask where the firearm is, answer clearly and specifically without moving toward it. It's on my right hip. It's in the center console. It's in the glove compartment. Keep your hands visible the whole time. If they say, "Hand it to me," your response should be calm and firm. "Officer, I'm not comfortable touching the firearm in your presence. I'll keep my hands visible. You're welcome to secure it." That sentence does three things. It shows cooperation, it avoids sudden movement, and it puts control of the weapon in the officer's hands in a way that matches their training. Hands visible. Fingers spread if asked. No sudden gestures. Let them retrieve it. Don't reach to help. Don't fiddle with the gun. In this moment, less is more. And you need to be absolutely clear about this. The side of the road is not where constitutional battles are won. It is where misunderstandings can turn deadly. If an officer mishandles your firearm, unloads it clumsily, scratches it, or does something you don't like, that is an issue for later, through a lawyer, a complaint process, or a court. It is not a reason to grab, argue, or physically intervene while the stop is in progress. The instant you start physically resisting how an officer is handling a weapon, you've turned a verbal disagreement into a physical confrontation. That shift is extremely dangerous. Finally, let's talk about what not to do overall, because sometimes avoiding a handful of mistakes is as important as knowing the right sentences. Don't try to be funny. Joking your way out of a ticket is a story people tell. It's not a strategy. Humor under stress is unpredictable. What sounds playful in your head can sound disrespectful to someone else. Don't try to show off how much law you know. There's no benefit in trying to impress the officer with how many cases or amendments you can quote. It usually just irritates the person who currently has a lot of discretion over how your evening goes. Don't raise your voice to match theirs. If the officer's tone gets louder, yours gets softer. If they speed up, you slow down. That calm contrast matters later if anything is reviewed on video. Don't overshare in the name of transparency. Transparency without strategy is just exposure. If your state does not require you to disclose that you're armed, choosing not to say anything about it is not lying. Lawful silence is not deception. It's a right. And above all, don't physically resist while verbally asserting your rights. That combination destroys your protection. The formula that keeps you safest is simple. Comply physically. Assert your rights verbally. Strip away the politics, the online debates, the emotion, and your real objective is straightforward. Get through the encounter safely, protect your legal position, and avoid giving away leverage you don't have to give. Before we wrap up, there's one more layer that matters more than any single phrase you memorize: personal responsibility. Laws vary by state. They vary by permit status. They change over time. A strategy that protects you in one place can create problems in another if you don't understand the local rules. It's your responsibility to know which category your state falls into: duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. It's also your responsibility to remember that what you're hearing here is education, not personalized legal advice. If you carry regularly, you should know a qualified attorney in your state before you ever need one, not after something has already gone wrong. The worst time to learn your rights is when you're in handcuffs or standing beside your car watching it get searched. Preparation is quiet. It happens long before the flashing lights. So let's come back to that first moment. You're driving. The lights come on. You pull over safely, interior light on, hands visible, breathing steady. The officer approaches. You provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance. You follow whatever your state's law requires about firearm disclosure, no more, no less. Then comes the question, any weapons in the vehicle? This time, you don't panic. You don't overshare. You don't start trying to prove you're one of the good ones. You answer according to your legal obligation in that state. Nothing more, nothing less. If the questions turn investigative, you calmly say, I plead the fifth. If you're asked for consent to search, you say, I do not consent to any searches. If the firearm needs to be secured, you say, I'm not comfortable touching it. You're welcome to secure it. Hands visible, movement slow, tone even. Notice what's missing from that version. No arguing, no sarcasm, no emotional outbursts, no unnecessary details. You are boring, predictable, controlled. And that is exactly what protects you. Because the side of the road is not where you win your case. It's where you avoid building one against yourself. Every extra sentence can be a brick in that wall. Every unnecessary explanation can be an excuse to extend the stop. Used correctly, silence is not suspicious. It is strategic. So here's the mindset I want you to carry from now on. You do not owe roadside conversation beyond what the law requires. You do not have to perform cooperation. You do not have to convince anyone of your innocence. Your job is simple. Comply physically, assert your rights verbally, and get home safely. If you remember nothing else, remember this: calm voice, clear boundaries, consistent phrases. And when the questions go beyond the basic reason for the stop, use your constitutional protection without apology. Because at the end of the day, rights only protect the people who use them. And when that question comes, any weapons in the vehicle, you'll know exactly what to do and exactly what not to say.